Okay. Well, good morning all, and welcome to a Tuesday meeting of the Technical Advisory Group for the Clean Heat Standard. I'm Rick Weston, Chair. We have a quorum today as expected, and we've got a shortened agenda. We don't expect to stay on for the full three. Well, I don't think we're going to stay on for the full 2.5 hours we've got, but we'll see. In any case, as usual, please, tag members, keep your videos on and your audios off unless you're speaking, and everybody else, video and audio off until and unless you speak during a public comment period. And as usual, we don't use the chat for anything other than links to relevant documents. Do we have any guests today?
Well, Matthew Baker-Pole is here.
Matthew and Tristan Brown.
Tristan Brown's here.
Yeah.
Emily, is Ben joining us, I hope?
Yeah, Ben will be here. He's running a little bit late today, so he'll probably join around 11, but it looks like he's not until noon on the agenda.
Well, it might be sooner than that, but if he comes early, what we want to do with him is just bring up the last page of his PowerPoint, because we didn't get to questions. And then
Yep, he'll be here starting at 11.
Yeah, and then we'll just take the pulse of the tag about how much more we actually want to do or say about measures that purportedly or are expected to reduce energy bills. So that'll be fine.
If I could interrupt, I just admitted an attendee coming in under Zoom user. Could I ask you to?
That's Emily.
Emily Grubert. Sorry, thanks.
Great. Okay, thank you.
Welcome, Emily.
Adam Sherman might also be joining us at some point.
Okay, good. Well, let's start with a review of the minutes of our last meeting 10 days ago. Hope you've all had a chance to look at them. Are there any changes that folks think ought to be made before we vote to adopt them? Hearing none, I'll take a motion to adopt those minutes of the 14th.
I'll be bold and move that we accept those minutes.
Thank you, Michelle. Okay. Michelle has moved that we adopt the minutes of November 14th, 2024. All in favor signify by raising one's hand.
Well, and just on this point, Brian pointed out to us that the recording does not actually register hand gestures, the virtual hands, for some reason in our recording. So I went back to look at it. I couldn't find it either, Brian. So I think this is fine for the minutes, but in the future, we will have to take a roll call, a verbal roll call on significant votes. Just to acknowledge that, Brian. Thank you for bringing that to our attention.
Is it possible if it's unanimous, we don't have to do that? So we could use the hands.
Right.
All the hands are up, then you could just,
yes, that would work.
The minutes can report that it was unanimous.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. In the case of unanimous, absolutely can. And that's what I was going to do here. Absolutely. And it is unanimous. Well, let me ask, are there any votes opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, then it is unanimous. Yeah, great. Okay, well, thank you. Let's move on to the next item. Deirdre, updates from the PUC.
I think I just have two things to mention. So the early action credit order that was issued last week and circulated to the group yesterday. So a reminder that that's, there's an opportunity for the tag to weigh in there if the group wishes to. So essentially, because the group is tasked with advising on credit value, in that order, the commission is suggesting that early action credits be valued at the same way as regular program credits. So with its final TRM formulas and carbon intensity values and opinion dynamics deliverables. So if the group believes there should be a different valuation for early action credits, then that, the commission would want to hear that feedback and what that alternative would be. The deadline in the order says December 6th, but recognizing that's not enough time, can accept feedback up until the day after the next meeting, so the 13th would be fine. So I think, and it's a pretty short order. If you haven't gotten a chance to read it yet, it's a fairly short order, but the reference to the tag is the last paragraph, just on valuation, because you all have, already weighed in on ownership, for instance, of early action credits. The only other thing is kind of timeline for opinion dynamics feedback. So we're really getting to the tail end of, their engagement, and they're really hoping to wrap up their deliverables a week or two before the end of the year because of people being out, the holidays. So they have less than a month to tie up loose ends on their deliverables. So I would say, certainly the window for fundamental significant changes for this version of the TRM and deliverables has closed. These are not static documents. If the clean heat standard, exists and lives on, so will these documents. So the window for feedback in general has not closed, but for the final version that's due at the end of the year, we're getting very close to that. So I would say if, individuals want to provide direction or feedback, I would say in the next week and a half, would be best, by the 6th. Certainly they'll be here at the next meeting on the 12th. And what they've asked me to pass along is that, at this stage, they're going to have, so after that meeting, they're going to have about a week and a day to incorporate any direction from the group. So it's got to be really targeted. The group is welcome to ask questions of how they derive certain values or characterize certain measures, but I think at this stage in their engagement, they're really looking for very specific feedback that they can implement on that short timeline. So I think, I know that we're running out of time here, but that's where I am with how much time at least they have left for this version of the deliverables.
Well, our next item on the agenda, of course, is a discussion of this new TRM. And while during today's meeting, we're not taking any votes, we're making no decisions on anything today. We do want to obviously start digging into some of the questions that the new TRM raises, if any. Catherine and I were talking about this prior to the meeting. In light of this and the schedule that you've just suggested, and we had this in mind, it probably makes sense for us, and we'll discuss this in the next slot, as I said, for us to convene a working group to identify questions, issues that we'd want to discuss with OD when they present on the 12th. And I would imagine verbally much of our feedback will occur then. But as you say, individuals can file comments up until the 13th. Is that correct?
I would, even earlier would be better.
Well, you said the 6th. You
Yeah,
did say the 6th.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's yeah. Well, then it seems to me that a lot of the tag input will come through the questions that we deliver from a subgroup, and then the discussion itself. But let's see what we can do. Ken?
Yeah, just a couple things. In the workbook, the Excel workbook, there are at least a couple tabs that are broken. Low flow shower heads and residential insulation. Anyway, so if you or have them, just go through each of the tabs. And broken, when you look at the calculations for carbon reduction or credit calculation, it gives you an error. It shows an error, or clearly the block is broken. So if you could just go through and have them go through and just fix all the broken ones. So those are the two that I found, but I didn't look at them all. So.
Okay, thanks for flagging that. And this is the most recent.
Yeah, it's the one, right? The one that came out the end of the week.
All right, sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, 2 days, yeah, the 22nd. I think is the date, is its date.
Well, they found that broke. I didn't actually investigate what the problem was, but they, the updated version that referenced, I'm assuming that's not it, but I just wanted to make sure that it was the very latest Excel that was circulated.
Yeah, I saw a 19th and a 22nd, so
Okay.
I'm pretty sure it's the most recent one. But
Yeah, and I've seen the 22nd as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anything else, Deirdre?
I think that's it.
Okay. Well, thank you. Well, any questions for Deirdre? Well, if not, let's dive into the new TRM. I thought this should be, we'd work this as mostly an open discussion, but people, if you've had a chance to look at it, obviously, that will make the discussion more productive. I realize it's 200 some odd pages and we only had it for the last few days. But getting an idea here of what some of our reactions to it are would be helpful. If you agree that we may want to that we should put together a working group to identify particular issues and questions that we want to pose to Opinion Dynamics. We can do that before the 6th of December. It seems to me to be fairly straightforward, and then have a discussion with OD on the 12th and give our feedback verbally. It seems to me that would work. So I'm going to open it up. I've looked through and just by way of kick-starting it, I've looked through it. I haven't gone back through every measure characterization one by one, but I spent some time with the section on methodology and assumptions, and a few questions came up. But before I start, I'd like to put it out to you all. What you've seen in the new TRM and whether you think it's in, what you've seen is moving in a better direction, a different direction, a preferred direction. Ken, I'll start with you.
yeah, it's the general question, and that is, I'm never sure whether the parameters included are consistent with the way we do programs. And we, of course, isn't me. It's, largely Efficiency Vermont, maybe the utilities with regards to Tier 3. Maybe if there's contractors that, I don't know if they've ever been involved in this, but it's, at some point we've got to register credits. And if, always the hardest one for me to imagine is the insulation. They talk about the amount of insulation in square feet, but they have to assume a starting point. And I just don't know if our weatherization folks do that. So, and if you don't, then you can't use it. I mean, you can't establish a specific credit amount. So that's a general question for a lot of these is the information going to be available so that credits can be registered? So, and I don't know, Emily, about Efficiency Vermont, whether you folks have had that kind of discussion about, okay, we're looking at this. I mean, I guess in part it goes to consistency with the technical reference manual that's used for other actions. But that's to me is a big question.
Yeah, I can give a quick follow-up on that. Ben isn't here, but he would know the direct answer to that. But I know that when he does review this TRM, he's looking for consistencies and inconsistencies with the TRMs that he works with. So I haven't heard anything from him about inconsistencies in that area, but we can double check and I can follow up. But he hasn't seen any red flags with inconsistencies.
Good.
And he's going to be on the phone in a little bit, so on the call in a little bit. Others, any initial reactions? The questions that appeared to me, that came up for me, the first ones that sort of jumped out were those around the counterfactuals and the upstream emissions on the biofuels. I've only just started looking at them. Has anybody had a chance to take a look at the changes that, they appear to be changes that OD has made? If you haven't had a chance, then a working group is really where we need to, dig in on this. And that'll give us a little time, another few days to review the TRM. But for those of you who've had a chance to look at those values, any thoughts?
Yeah, Rick, I've looked at them in the spreadsheet, haven't read through the Word document yet. I think what stands out to me, and certainly not pushing back at all, but the values look different than what I've seen in other programs. So hopefully, I expect that the read through will probably explain that. But that's the only comment from me now. Thanks.
Okay. This could be a short discussion.
I can add a little bit more detail to the updates of the emissions accounting changes for renewable fuels, just so folks who haven't gotten a chance to go through it know what the status is. So they did add crediting for avoided methane, for example, to the baseline for renewable natural gas. So that's resulting in a lower carbon intensity score for various biofuels. There are also increases in the carbon intensity scores for a few of the fuel crops, some of which are not insubstantial. So if those areas are of interest, they're definitely worth reviewing.
Would you make that last point again? You said for crop-based fuels? I'm sorry, I just missed it.
Yeah. So, for example, for biodiesel from corn, for example, I think the carbon intensity increased by more than double digits.
And I think we know the reason for that is that they assumed all of the carbon intensity for corn goes to ethanol. And I'm not sure exactly how they broke it up, but I think then they backed off on that and allocated some of the carbon intensity to the oil product and not all to ethanol. That's my understanding.
Oh, I think that's right. They did talk about yes, an allocation method. You're right.
So if I can ask a question, so aside from the allocation question, and we'll take a look at that, what was the reasoning for increasing the other CIs for the liquid biofuels?
Matthew, can you
have that reasoning handy? Sorry, Floyd.
Yeah.
No worries. And I apologize. I haven't had a chance to take a deep look at it, so I will be doing that.
No, I'm not surprised. It's a long document and there's a lot to it.
Yeah.
So maybe we are at a sort of a point where we can't make much progress in discussion if we haven't really dug down into it. Ken, let me or Matthew, did any numbers really strike you as, or Sam, off the, really out of the realm of reasonableness?
Just zip through the changes that I noted. So biomethane for animal waste went from 15.2 to -63.3. This is
yes.
grams per megajoule, I believe. Landfill gas, slight decrease from 7.7 to 6.8. Slight decrease for biomethane from fats, oils, and greases. Pretty significant change for biomethane from wastewater. Went down from 40 to basically -10. Soybeans, slight increase between 26 and 27. Biodiesel from canola, not a slight increase, 25 to 35. Corn, not an insignificant increase from 10 to 40. I'll just stop boring everybody with these and look for the other big changes. Another big change, the renewable diesel from corn, 12 to 44. And we added, or Opinion Dynamics, added renewable propane at 33 based on an average of a very small sample of existing registered and retired projects in California's program.
Right, and you're referring to the first year numbers. They do change a little bit going out, but not much.
Right. The differences were from the October 29th version of the emissions table and the November 19th version of the emissions table.
Got it. Okay.
Rick, to answer your question, ones that stood out, the animal manure pathway is higher than I've seen in other places. The landfill pathway looks a little bit lower than I've seen. Also curious about some of the hydrogen stuff, but again, just need to dig in here. So only to flag what I'll be looking at, but not signaling necessarily anything wrong with that.
Right. Gotcha. Ken?
Yeah, and this is kind of the parallel question to the installed measures piece, and that is, and I think we had a little bit of the discussion, but I didn't understand its conclusion a couple weeks ago. And that is, as these liquid, especially liquid biofuels are created, sent to the refineries or sent to the facility that turns them into a final combustion product, are they clearly identified as to what their feedstock is? So that when they get to Vermont, we know if they had canola as their starting point, or we know that they had a waste food oil as a starting point. I mean, if the answer is yes, that's great. But I just don't. I don't know if that is the case.
Good point. Thanks. Any other thoughts? This might be a very short discussion. Although it would be
Most of my thoughts are on installed measures.
right. Okay. Yeah. And we'll be having a chat about those shortly, in part. Well, look, this might be an appropriate time. Look, we've all got Thanksgiving coming up, and I do want to wish you all a wonderful holiday. But I would say if there's no more immediate comment, we should plan on a working group next week. Okay. And I would pick Thursday just because that's our usual. Oh, Matthew?
Sorry, is that an old hand up?
No. I thought you were saying something. Forgive me.
Oh, no, I think it's just a ping on Teams or something. I do have quite a bit of general comment on this, but it's not, my comments have not gone through the department's process, so they're not department official, but I don't know if it would be worthwhile. I think you were kind of alluding to saying we'll have a shorter meeting today and we could have a subgroup meeting follow-up. My personal position is that with the amount of time remaining, I'm concerned that some of the department's feedback might not reach opinion dynamics in a timely manner. But again, that's just the way the process works. And I can't speak on behalf of the department without review of our document through our director level and commissioner level.
Well, then I would, it probably doesn't make sense for you to go through your comments then today for that reason.
Fair.
Unless you want to, I mean, but if it probably doesn't make sense. But if you can at least get some responses from your colleagues and marshal your thoughts for a meeting next week, that'd be great. I know that's hard, but that would be, that'd be important for our work. So I'm suggesting we have a meeting next week of those of us who really want to dig into this and should dig into this, and identify questions and issues that we would then just forward to Opinion Dynamics in preparation for our December 12th meeting. Is that, I'm not hearing any opposition to that idea. Is that okay? Seeing nods. What I would suggest then, for now, next then, is that we actually open up this question for public comment. We'll take public comment on the TRM and any thoughts folks would like to alert us to in preparation for our discussion next week.
And before that, I'm just wondering if we've got Ben Plotzker now.
Yep.
If we want to ask Ben the question that Ken raised at the top of this discussion about consistency. I know Emily was sort of speaking on his behalf, but maybe he can respond.
Yeah.
You want to repeat your question?
Ken?
Sure, and that is the parameters which determine the carbon reduction and therefore credit values for all, and I'm looking at the installed measures, for all the installed measures would need to be available data in order to actually determine credit amounts. And the example that I brought up is in insulation, where they provide a I think it's a heat reduction that translates to a carbon reduction that translates to a credit based upon the final insulation amount on a per square foot basis for walls and attics, and assumes a starting point of insulation. I think it's always zero, but again, but in order therefore to use that determination, you need to either know that it was zero, and that would make it easier, or then somehow mess with it if it wasn't zero, so that the insulation you add could translate to a number of credits. I can imagine that being rather difficult, but that's the one example. But there may be many, many, many other examples where the information that they use to characterize the credit is actually not information that is readily available for when we want to register a credit.
Ben, any thoughts?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Just joining in. Great. Just reviewing what we do have here, Ken, for the installation measures, at least here for EVT. We have had the concern, not so much on the delivery and verification side, but also the savings are obviously much greater if someone were to actually say that there was no insulation initially. So in the insulation of attic and or basement, we've essentially made a more of a conservative approach by saying that the R value is 10, when in fact it could be 0 if there was no insulation, and that is to actually minimize the concern around fraud or anyone trying to increase or inflate savings, and therefore a higher incentive could be provided for those projects. So it's not really answering directly your question around implementation side. I think we have to dig in with someone here at EVT in the home performance space. But from my understanding, we haven't had a problem implementing these programs as is. I believe the contractors are going in there and making their best guess estimates as to the pre-existing conditions, and then whatever they're blowing the cellulose in, and accounting for that as the efficient condition. So I don't think that directly answers your question, but I think we definitely have some program staff that are highly knowledgeable and have maybe could provide more context around the risks and issues that we've seen as we've implemented a semi-prescriptive approach. This used to be highly custom, running it through a tool called Hero to come up with those savings. And now that we've been implementing this as a semi-prescriptive measure, we've seen more uptake and less administrative costs.
I think that sounds good. But again, I just wonder when we actually get to assigning credits, whether this TRM is actually what you want to use in order to characterize the savings and therefore develop the credits. And if you want to do it differently, if you do it differently and want to do it differently, I strongly, strongly, strongly encourage you to tell Opinion Dynamics to change the TRM.
Yeah, I think my interpretation of the TRM as is you could always go through a custom approach to provide a custom incentive to the customer. It obviously would require more work on site to get to that answer, as well as a customized calculation. But I don't see anything in the TRM as characterized preventing that from happening, Ken. So that is kind of my interpretation. I think the door is always open for someone doing a custom calculation and leveraging the existing algorithms in this characterization to inform those outcomes. Because if the customer has no insulation, put the R value to 0, and if they get the attic up to R 60, 70, that's a huge delta. That delta does not get characterized in our TRM. So I think that door is open for a custom calculation.
Well, what about tier 3 measures that also will qualify as clean heat standard measures, clean heat measures? Is there consistency of, on deemed savings? Is there consistency here with with what you do now?
So we don't have a characterization in the tier 3 TRM for air sealing or insulating. It's just the efficiency Vermont or the energy efficiency utility TRM. And from my knowledge, I haven't seen any of the distribution utilities do like a typical residential weatherization project through tier 3. It's typically just fuel switching and line extensions more on the C&I side.
Okay, but those are tier 3 measures, right?
Correct.
And they would qualify as clean heat measures as well, right? So I might.
Correct.
So the question is, what they put in this latest TRM is consistent with that? I believe they have been, is my understanding, but you can tell me otherwise.
Correct. They are consistent. That's really my priority here is consistency across all 3 of these TRMs. This is on another topic, but I still see some concerns around the full load hours for heating on the heat pumps. I didn't see those updates in the latest draft of the TRM. So I'll just note that as well. That's inconsistent and increasing savings from what the energy efficiency utility TRM currently characterizes.
I'd also point out that the baseline efficiency and I guess the particular requirements do align with the EVT TRM, but the wood stove efficiency is not in alignment with the EVT TRM, nor the TAG's recent 8-4 vote on the same.
Got it. Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. Okay.
So I have a corollary question, and that is, I don't know either in terms of tier 3 or other incentive programs, the extent to which this specific fuel that's being replaced is identified. And others have raised it, and I understand that, they always have unknown as an option. And if you're going from if you're actually replacing a lower carbon baseline fuel, it would be to your advantage to say unknown. And so, but I don't even know if we do tier 3 or any of the other incentive programs in a differential way depending upon the fuel that's being replaced. So yeah, I hope that's clear.
Yeah, I can follow up on this. The way the planning tool or kind of we use an Excel file to summarize the TRM impacts. They do align with the efficiency Vermont TRM, which does perform a blended approach, as we've discussed before, which is kind of the unknown. So utilizing, it's obviously an imperfect math, but if 40% of Vermont single family homes use oil for their heating system, 40% of the MMBTU savings are allocated to an oil boiler or furnace, and then so on and so forth for wood and propane. And that all gets pulled together and averaging the efficiencies of those units. So the quick answer is no, tier 3 does not do that. It is another approach in administrative efficiency. I think that's the key word here, is trying to make the delivery of the incentive through the midstream program as seamless as possible to the contractor, and minimize the amount of calculations done by the contractor to then get the savings back to the utility. So unknown is used across the board, from my understanding. And then to muddy the water a little bit more, this is, I don't think we've touched this before, is that for both just the ductless air source heat pumps for tier 3, there is a adjustment factor for having controls or no controls, so integrated controls speaking to your supplementary heating system. And then if it's if it's recently been weatherized versus a home that has not been weatherized recently, you take a haircut to those savings if you cannot verify if the unit has controls and or it is been in a recently weatherized home. And what I see in distribution utilities annual reports is that all of their claims are just assuming no controls and no weatherization, therefore not requiring further verification after the install. So it's kind of like a severe unknown selection.
So there's and this is going to be an implementation piece. If we think of the clean heat standard approach in close parallel to tier 3, then, and it has to do with credit ownership, and a contractor, maybe, well, okay, a contractor that works in multiple buildings, if they accumulate the credits rather than try to provide differential incentive amounts to the different projects, then that's fine. I mean, that's right. It helps administratively, but it also works in that, they don't, if they have some natural gas homes, some oil homes, some wood homes, yeah, but they do 30 projects in a year or 50 projects in a year, then that's fine. The credit gets blended. But I think for some people there's this, and it has to do with credit ownership, that if the building owner is going to be getting the benefit of the credit, then that differentiation makes more difference. And I'm very, very, very happy having contractors be the accumulator of credits and not have them go to homeowners, building owners. And I know that's a minority opinion, but in part administratively, but also I just think just the practical manner homeowners owning a credit just doesn't fit into a market very easily at all. But we've had that discussion. But I think that this point about kind of emphasizing the blended starting point, I think needs to be communicated. There's real value to that. It's consistency with the way programs are delivered. It helps administratively. But it does say that, okay, if just because you're a heating oil home, you don't get more credits than someone who has a lower carbon fuel.
Right. For folks who've just recently joined us, we're on the third item of our agenda. We're talking about the latest TRM, and we're reaching a conclusion that we are going to put together a working group next week to identify questions and issues that we will then forward to Opinion Dynamics as they prepare for their presentation to us on December 12th. If there are no more questions among the tag on this issue, I will open it up to public comment. We've got some extra time here. If there's anything on this subject, the TRM, that members of the public would like to alert us to as we prepare for meeting with Opinion Dynamics, we'd like to hear from you. And I see one hand. Mr. Porter.
Good morning, everybody. Yes, I've posed this question previously through EPUC submissions, but I want to pose it again now and pose it until it's answered. There are two unfounded assumptions in the TRM regarding wood. One is that it is waste wood. I provided in the chat a link to a FPR document that strongly suggests that wood fuel is logged, specifically for wood fuel. There's no supporting evidence to suggest that wood, whether it be wood chips or wood pellets or cordwood, is waste wood. So that's one assumption that I think is debunked by that document. The second assumption, unfounded assumption, is that because it's waste wood, it somehow does not emit CO2 when it's burned. And there's no evidence to suggest that, and clear evidence that any wood that is burned emits CO2. So I'd like to find out why those assumptions are still in the TRM, both from OD and from the tag. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Okay. Ken.
Yeah, I mean, Pike deserves a response, and for at least the second half, the point has been made that a wood product that might otherwise not be growing, in other words, it's been somehow cut down, either in the forest. Well, and again, there's two waste products. One is a mill waste, and that's really just largely wood pellets. But in terms of, yeah, wood chips and cordwood, if this was a logging practice that left trees down, that does ultimately lead to carbon dioxide emissions, and that's the ultimate word. That's the key word. It's ultimately. And so depending upon the diameter of the tree and the diameter of the wood product, it's whether it's 3 years, 5 years, 15 years, 25 years, it goes to carbon dioxide. So that's the rationale that says that it doesn't emit any carbon dioxide upon combustion, because the assumption is it emits carbon dioxide absent combustion. And I'm not going to support that because it has to do with all this timing, but that is the reason they keep doing that. And the waste wood topic, or I prefer the term lower economic value, is all related to harvest practice. And I wish we had better discussion about what a harvest practice is if you don't take lower economic value trees out of the woods. I was raised on the belief that that's called high grading. And I've been raised on the belief that high grading is bad for the forest. I wish we had better description of that, but that's again the reason why the term waste wood is thrown around so much, because they believe that forest management practices have a benefit, and we've been using it for decades in Vermont. It's a requirement in current use to remove low economic value trees from the forest. So again, that's their rationale. You may disagree with it, but I don't want you to continue to believe that at least I'm not ignoring your point. And again, I wish we had better text that would describe it, because I'm not the expert, but I'm not as uncomfortable that it's being ignored, because I have heard those responses before.
Ken, when you say ultimate CO2 emissions, you mean ultimate CO2 equivalent emissions? Aren't they mostly methane at that point?
No, it's CO2. Yeah, trees rot. Trees rot in the forest. They rot largely aerobically,
Okay.
and that's CO2.
Yes, right. Good point. Thank you. Okay, Pike, I'll let you speak again, but I don't want to get into a debate here.
Thank you. Yes, I don't disagree that they rot and they emit CO2. However, they don't emit the same amount of CO2 that they would as they're burned, because much of that carbon dioxide is restored in the soils, in decomposing waste. Our forest soils hold, and sometimes more CO2 than the trees themselves. And that's because of the dead leaf litter and litter decomposing matter over time. And, I can and have provided dozens of scientific articles explaining the really false assumptions of the carbon neutrality of wood. And I think the science needs to be addressed as much as the unfounded statements that we've heard from ANR and Burke and others. Thank you.
Thanks, Pike. Appreciate it. Yeah, ANR is obviously an important actor in this. So yeah, okay. Any other feedback from members of the public? And the last chance for tag members to weigh in on anything. Okay.
Rick.
Yes, let's pick a date.
Yeah, if you're going to pick Thursday, say we, generously give people till 10:30 to 12:30. It would be great just to see a show of hands of those who would like to participate that could not at that time.
Next Thursday.
Thursday, the 5th of December.
Well, let me take a look at my schedule. I'm assuming I can.
Calendars, 5th of December, 10:30 to 12:30, and see if that is doable if you want to participate in this discussion. If it's not, could you let me know by raising your hand?
Well, this looks good.
All right, if that is the case, I will send out a subgroup invitation to the entire tag, and then whoever wants to come can come.
Great. And the purpose will be to identify issues and questions that we have for Opinion Dynamics, and we'll collect them and send them on right away so that they'll have at least a week to prepare for our discussion with them the following week. Okay. Well, that's good. Great. Well, with that, let's move on to the next item. There are really two items here. They morph into one. At our last meeting, we wanted to begin a discussion around the translation of carbon intensity values to credit values. Ken has kindly prepared a spreadsheet, little table that gives you an idea of how that might work, and a memo to describe it. Unfortunately, you only got those yesterday, I believe. I'm sorry about that. Ken, it would be great. Well, we also, and as part of this, there'll be some discussion of, measure characterizations as well. Ken, can I turn to you to give us just a quick overview of what you've done in that spreadsheet, that table, and maybe Catherine, could you put up that table? That might be helpful.
And while she's doing that, my reason for doing this is to try to understand the relative benefit of different installed clean heat measures and whether they make sense. When we start assigning credits to action, then because there's such a wide range of installed measures, that it's possible, and I think there's a couple of examples where you say, hey, are those really comparable? Do you really get the benefits that the credit values assume when you're installing, and I use heat pumps as kind of the touch point, the starting point. If you install a heat pump, what does it mean to do any of these other things, whether it be advanced thermostat, low flow shower head, they're just so different. Do the credits make sense? And what I did, this is very, very, very much a simplification. The TRM has many different sort of conditions for each of the technologies. And so in order to compare the classes, you have to pick a set of characterizations. So in part, it's the size of a unit, which is that measure under the measure detail. You'll see in terms of heat pumps, I think of a ductless partial home heat pump as being the equivalent of a mini split. I use 18,000 BTU per hour. It's a little bigger maybe than, I'll say, average, but it's the one I have. So I wanted to use that. And then in terms of whole home systems, 36,000 BTU is probably smaller than what is necessary. If you're truly going to have a heat pump system that works 24/7 through the coldest parts of the year, then it may be that those systems are going to need to be significantly larger, which raises one of the questions, but I think this is true in TRMs generally, and that is, it is not a linear relationship between the size of a heat pump and the savings, because you make them bigger and bigger and bigger, not because you're going to use them linearly more, but because when it's really cold, you need more. But again, I believe that's consistency across TRMs generally. We don't have a mechanism to compare the size of a heating unit with the overall demand in a building to give you a more accurate reflection of the actual savings based upon the unit you're putting in there. So that's what we got, and I'm fine with that. But again, I'm just describing that I did pick certain values that will be very different in different buildings. Smaller mini splits, bigger whole home systems. And if you're putting in multiple ductless systems in a home, then you get more BTUs per hour, and therefore get more credits. So that, and then, you know, as we've talked about, the fuel replaced makes a difference in the calculation of credits, and that's appropriate. Whether we can actually implement that is something that we'll have to figure out. But anyway, I laid them out there. I did for the mini split, just again to give you the general sense of what the difference would be if you did note that you were replacing fuel oil, or you're replacing natural gas, or if you're doing the blend. And I look at those numbers and say, you know, those aren't huge differences. Those aren't going to screw up the system entirely. So that's why I'll say I'm personally kind of comfortable saying, yeah, use the unknown fuel on a regular basis, and it's not going to screw up overall savings by a tremendous amount. Certainly it would be always better if you can be more precise, but anyway, that's where we are.
Just for clarity's sake, the math, just for the lifetime credit, the math is fairly simple. I'm going to describe it and you tell me if I've got it right.
Yep.
It's 18,000 BTUs per hour times however many hours device is used. Well, hang on, to determine the avoided fuel, correct?
Right, and OD does all that stuff.
And OD does all that. So so the math is just straight arithmetic. And of course, it's netted out, of course, of the emissions associated with, in this case, the electricity.
Right.
Right. So so the credit number is fairly straightforward. That's tons, right? 14.7 tons.
Correct.
And now you've divided by the lifetime, so you get 0.92. As you point out in your memo, you call this first year credit, even though it could be annual credit, but you don't do that because you're concerned about persistence and other actions that could reduce the value.
Yeah, I'm curious is if when this system, I'm going to say when, I'm not going to say if, when this system is implemented and we're out a few years, I know the Public Service Department is going to be doing a study on the specific benefits of heat pumps in terms of their utilization and their carbon reduction. And it may very well be that the numbers are going to be smaller, which means that the calculated credits will be lower in the future. I know that the law says, I think the law says, when you establish the credit value upon registration, that is the credit value. But they could take future credits and discount them, in part because we may learn that they're lower, and you know, the measure life is 16 years, but not all of them are going to last 16 years. So there may be reasons, and I don't know if it's legal, but there may be reasons to discount future credits or future savings so that it would reduce the total lifetime credit, and therefore the first year would be that straight total credit divided by the number of years. But in going out years, maybe that annual credit number goes down.
Well, and another way to do that, though, is to anticipate those losses and calculate them from the start.
Yeah.
You know, which I think is what EVT does for efficiency measures. Historically, we've always recognized that persistence and, you know, change outs of equipment and so on affect savings that programs produce. Okay. If folks have questions for Ken on this, by all means, let's chat about it. But I will remind folks that our task here is, well, there are two tasks in the legislation, and you can see this at the bottom of the agenda, are establishing and revising clean heat credit values for different measures, and establishing credit values for each year over the clean heat measure's expected life, including adjustments to account for increasing interactions between clean heat measures over time so as not to double count emissions reductions. I'm not sure that the tag needs to say anything at this point about this. If this is the math, this math is, in my view, is quite straightforward and appropriate. The question of double counting from the interaction of clean heat measures, we've talked about this before, and I believe that there's some attempt on the part of OD to load the measures, to put them the way measures get delivered, you know, insulation first, then fuel switching, yada, 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 is an attempt to deal with this question of potential double counting. But at this point, I don't know if there's anything that we need to say under these tasks, given what OD has done and what I think is a fairly straightforward mathematical operation. Any reactions to that thought?
I mean, yeah, the issue of double counting, you know, especially that sort of sequencing of putting in, let's say, heat pump and then doing weatherization, it is definitely going to introduce inaccuracy. But I think we have to realize that our precision at this point is so unprecise that that's just one of many, many, many factors. To me, utilization is the biggest. Even these whole home systems, I'm aware, I work with a contractor who puts in whole home heat pumps. They have combustion backup. There are very few homes that will not have a combustion backup system. And as soon as you have combustion backup, well, is it going to be used 2% of the time, 5% of the time, 10% of the time? You know, we're not going to know that because that's going to be a use pattern that, unless we actually monitor the specific heating systems, which I don't think anyone at this point is suggesting we do, then we're just going to have to approximate. So yeah, there's a lot of variables that are going to alter the specific outcome. So these numbers, well, you know, I carry some of the numbers out to 4 digits. Well, that's ridiculous. It's only because my calculator can do that, not because I actually believe it.
Never confuse precision with accuracy.
That's correct. Right. That's why I don't personally worry too much about, you know, the issue of double counting, and yeah, it's going to make a difference, but we're starting here early and we got general numbers. It's going to provide some credit value. That's fine. And again, the reason I put this out is comparable. And so I'll, you know, raise one of the comparables. It's that advanced thermostat. So you put in an advanced thermostat, it gets you, what is that, 35 or 40% of the same value as an 18,000 BTU mini split. I think that's crazy. And part of the crazy is that you assume the advanced thermostat is going to be used perfectly, is the way I understand OD's work, where you get about a 7% reduction in fuel use. That's great, but I use my mini split, I won't say perfectly, I use it much more effectively than they assume I do. So I get a 50% reduction in the use of my combustion fuel at home. Okay, that I deserve more credits. Okay, I mean, I'm not certainly never going to ask for them, but it's that use pattern that, you know, I think we have more experience with heat pumps, therefore they came up with this value, which is about my estimate, about 20% of the replacement of the combustion source. Okay, that's because you're blending a lot of different use patterns. Well, I think you need to do the same thing with an advanced thermostat. You know, not everyone's going to use it perfectly. In fact, a lot of people aren't going to use them much at all. So that's just that's an example that comes out to me that you know, because, and also just a practical matter, if I'm a default delivery agent, I'm going to be going door to door and giving people advanced thermostats and installing them, and, you know, I probably can do it at $200 a pop, and I'll do 100,000 of those things, and I'll get a crap load of credits. But that's not what we want.
You anticipated a question I had. I'll ask it now, but I want to turn to Michelle. And the question is merely, are there any numbers here that really jump off the page at you? You've mentioned one, but we'll come back to that. Michelle?
Thank you, Rick, and thank you, Ken, for putting this together. I just want to reiterate that I think this is going to be very helpful as we continue to look at the latest version of the TRM and combine our interpretation of that with the practicality of the numbers here. I'm with you, Ken, on there are a few of these that jump out as being disproportionately high relative to both the societal and the environmental benefits based on what we've been discussing. So this is going to be a valuable tool for our future discussions.
Thanks. And I'll just point out that Matthew put in the chat text from 8127G3 reminding us that credits previously awarded or under contract to be produced shall not be adjusted retroactively. So there you go. Okay. Any other, well, let me just ask Ken, my question was, are there any other numbers there that jump off the page? And of course, these come directly from the credit, from the carbon intensity values in OD spreadsheet. So.
Yeah, but actually I have a question. I don't know I don't know, and so the central heat wood pellet things also jump out at me. Something's wrong there. But I don't know what MOP stands for. So somebody tell me what MOP stands for.
I believe that's market opportunity.
So does that mean, because I saw, they contrast MOP and retrofit. So I don't understand why someone explain to me why market opportunity is a significantly lower savings.
You think, yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. I would have thought it'd be the other way around.
But even then, in general, something's wrong there in that these are central systems. Central systems, my experience and understanding, these replace 100% of the other heating system. And I don't understand why the savings are so small. So that's something I need to, I need to go back. It's hard for me to look at the actual TRM itself. I'll be honest, it's pretty complicated. But I need to take this one in particular and go and figure out why is that number so low. But then also the difference between this market opportunity and retrofit, I don't get that either. So
yeah. Ben Plotzker.
Thanks. So I can answer the question on MOP versus retrofit, and thanks to Matthew for mentioning that it's a market opportunity. Market opportunity assumes that whatever system has failed and the customer is going out to market to purchase a piece of equipment, so it has to meet a federal standard or kind of a market baseline. So if you were to go to a Stoveworks store to buy a new stove, what is the least efficient you can legally purchase or potentially buy? So the delta between a new inefficient stove versus a incentivized efficient stove is smaller than a retrofit, which would be your system still works, but it's highly inefficient. So there's a greater delta in efficiency between the existing working condition versus a market opportunity, which is what is the least efficient you could theoretically buy at a store in Vermont or potentially ship to Vermont.
Well, under emergency conditions.
Yeah, I appreciate that description, but I don't think the world works that way. If you're putting in a central pellet system, first of all, my understanding, there's not a huge range on these things. They are, in fact, we had the discussion in one of the work groups about the efficiency of, especially you put a central pellet system in with heat storage, they are very, very, very efficient. And you don't have any choices. From my understanding, if you're putting in a central pellet, you don't have any choices. So this factor of 2.5 seems really odd.
Yeah, I'm looking at, sorry, I'm just digging into the TRM here. I don't know if we want to go into further discussion as to the guts of the baseline here, but for some of these retrofit conditions, you're really assuming the variety of wood impacts to existing. So this goes to the wood penalty that is found in the TRM, which is you don't take kind of a full, you don't take full benefit on the wood side because you assume that some percent of the existing condition is using wood already. So then there's a haircut being applied to the full fuel savings because you assume that it's not actually fuel savings being saved. You're assuming that large percent of that is actually wood being saved, and therefore there's no actual savings because it's wood to wood. But I'd have to dig in further. I'm not my team develops these TRMs, but I'm not the lead developer on that specifically. So if we want to illustrate the retrofit versus mop, we could certainly dig in there.
Well, if you could, and in the next few, next week, it'd be great if you have something you can pull together for us. That'd be great.
Sure.
Thanks. Luce.
Hi, good morning. I want to say thank you, Ken, for doing this because I had tried to look at it and I was struggling with trying to find out what the values were. This would be a question for Matt Coda, who I know is I don't believe he's on today, but I'm curious as to like what some of our smaller dealers, how many of like heat pumps would they have to put in, to meet an annual quota? And that would just be an interesting conversation to have. Are we talking about 10,000 units? I have no idea what that would be, but because it seems like a lot of people are putting in, the air source heat pumps, the ductless ones, right? That's a huge thing right now. It seems like a lot of people are putting those in, and it looks like we're not even getting one clean heat credit for that. So just curious as to what it all means. So another conversation at another time. Thank you.
Right. Thanks, Luce. Yep. Yeah, it certainly would depend on, what their sales are, but yeah, of course. Okay. Ken or anyone, Ken, unless you have anything else to add, I would say that I found this exercise very helpful, and I really appreciate you doing it because it got us from carbon intensities to credits in a very straightforward fashion. It really was very helpful. I don't know, as I say, that there's anything that the tag needs to say to the PUC if, other than this makes sense to us. And it, there are some nuances, and Ken, you pointed them out. But at this point, I feel like I got a handle on it, and at this point, there's nothing more to be said about it. Anybody disagree with that? Okay.
I was going to ask if some of the measures that were mentioned as being kind of outliers or puzzling, I'll put it that way, might be a subject for conversation at the subgroup. Is that right? So we will carry it forward to the subgroup.
Yeah, it's still a matter of carbon intensities. Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. This is merely turning carbon intensities into credits, or I say merely.
And I don't know if there was, you did also have at the bottom of the table, the delivered measures credits. Was anybody have any questions about that? We haven't talked about that yet.
And I just want to be clear, this is from the October, these numbers are based on the October carbon intensity values. So to the extent that those have changed, then but I just wanted to get a general sense, how, 100 gallons of B100, what is it? How does that compare to a heat pump, for example?
Right. Yep.
Say maybe it would be worthwhile to scale that up to the useful life and the volume of fuel based on the BTUs to get an apples to apples comparison there, because otherwise I don't think 100 gallons. I think a heat pump generally would displace significantly more than 100 gallons. So you need to multiply that number of gallons by, because it's a 12-year measure life, but by how many gallons would be displaced per year over that life.
Yeah, but actually the way they're assuming that 18,000 BTU mini split, it's less than 200 gallons.
Over what?
Per year. This is per year. I mean, yeah, I think these delivered measures are just going to be annual. You can only do them on a year basis. So, but yeah, I hear what you're saying. Right. I didn't intend to be a perfect one-to-one match. I just picked numbers that I could work with. But in my mind, I do think 100 gallons of B100 is close to it's probably very close to a 12,000 BTU mini split.
Right.
Yeah, for some reason I gravitate towards the bigger life cycle or total lifetime measure values. It's just,
Yeah.
for some reason, attracts the eye more.
Yep. Hear you.
Okay. Okay, well, this is good. Ken, really, so very grateful to you for this work. It's very helpful. So with that, let's move on. We've got one more item on the agenda, and that, well, a couple, but we, in our last meeting or the meeting before, I can't remember, was it the last meeting? We were not able to ask questions of Ben from EVT on his presentation. So I thought what we'd do is we'd pull up the last page of his presentation, and Ben, give you a chance to make any final comments you want to. The question here is about clean heat measures that produce energy savings and therefore bill savings. And we began to chat about it. And the question for us is, are we comfortable with what Ben is saying? And is there something that we ourselves want to say to the PUC at this point about what measures we think will produce bill savings? Ben, I'll turn it back to you for any.
Thanks, Rick. And yeah, because I did present this at the end of the last meeting, I just wanted to quickly summarize what was discussed and then move into the actual table presenting some of the economic or customer economic impacts. So we did leverage a variety of sources to inform us, all publicly available information from the TRM, but as well as the EIA and distribution utility rate sites. So our illustrative example here was assuming a customer that uses propane for their heating, space heating, and they are a Green Mountain Power customer. I chose these given the percent of Vermonters that are part of have GMP as a DU as well as consuming propane. And then I pulled in the specific measures that are in the list of characterization. So kind of choosing an individual line item of measures that we see a lot of here at EVT. So assumed about a 35,000 BTU per hour ductless heat pump, a 2.5-ton ducted heat pump, a smaller than 55-gallon tier 3 MIA heat pump water heater, and then some other average examples for air sealing and insulation. We pulled in the retrofit TRM costs here, which I summarized too, that for some of these measures, you have an additive cost of the retrofit and market opportunity to be stacked to create the total cost of the installed measure. And I'm also reporting here, NESCOM recently reported out a variety of significantly higher costs in the New England region for both ductless and ducted heat pumps. And so this is something that is likely going to inform future iterations of our TRM when it comes to what costs we are screening these measures against. But just to keep it aligned with what is in the opinion dynamics TRM, these are the costs outlined in those characterizations. And so these are the electric penalties where applicable across the fuel switching measures and then the fossil fuel MMBTU impacts. So we're seeing, about 47 MMBTU for both the ductless and ducted, about 14 for heat pump water heater. And then we used some average values here for both air sealing and insulation of about 5 MMBTU annually, that is. So these are the results. When you pull in the savings, the electric penalties, the cost, the lifetimes, and using propane as the fuel, I provide the outputs from the societal cost test, which the state of Vermont uses to screen measures for the energy efficiency utility. This means our portfolio has to be at a benefit cost ratio greater than 1.2 to be considered cost effective. And so in this case, the benefit cost ratio for those measures across all 5 of these do screen above 1. If they didn't screen, we wouldn't be putting incentives to these. And then these are the net present values for these measures as well. And then when we move into customer economics, so the state screening tool is the impact to society as a whole, not specifically you or my electric or gas bill. So first year savings, when we net out the electric penalty and the fossil fuel savings, these are the dollar amounts we're seeing across all those measures. Then multiplying by the lifetime of these measures, these are the lifetime impacts to customer bills. And then this is the return on investment, simply dividing the lifetime savings in dollars by the retrofit TRM cost. So these are the outputs of our kind of quick and easy calculation. This doesn't include any impacts to O&M or other values that were not presented within the TRMs. And so simply translating TRM outputs and putting them through customer economics as well as the societal cost test. I believe that was what I covered. I know that may have been a little bit longer than you may like, Rick, but I just wanted to reiterate that was covered, and that was 2 weeks ago, which always feels like months these days. So that's what we got.
Yes, given all that's happened too. No, thank you very much, Ben. So, but we've got, and Ken's got a question, but I'll just ask mine first, and then Floyd. These are 5 measures that you're saying produce obviously energy savings and economic benefits to end users. Just simple, I mean, yes. So were there any other measures that you didn't test that could also produce such benefits?
I had just chosen a short list here to kind of illustrate some of these impacts. So the answer is yes, we screen all these measures. And when I say we, I mean Efficiency Vermont. So there's measures that we at Efficiency Vermont provide incentives on. There's like the delivered fuels that we don't incentivize at the energy efficiency utility. But so there are values here for all those measures where there's overlap. I simply have provided a short list here of some of the measures we see the most uptake of, or like, you know, amount of that pie of incentives that we provide. So these being some of the heaviest hitting measures that overlap with the clean heat standard. This is the illustration.
Okay, thank you. I'll come back to that in a moment. Ken, then Floyd.
Yeah, so two observations. One is the installation cost. You know, clearly there's a huge difference there between the NESCOM number and a 30,000 BTU heat pump installation for less than 5,000. I always thought those whenever I saw those installation costs, I thought those were for little mini splits. You know, 12,000 BTU mini splits. So that there's that. And the other thing is something I brought up in other discussions. I know EIA has propane prices, but we have to recognize, especially if you're not a low-income household, many people do not pay anywhere close to those propane prices. I owned a building for 8 years and never paid more than $2 a gallon for propane, while EIA always had me paying $3, $4 a gallon. So I know it's a published number. I know where the number comes from. I mean, if you go and you ask a propane dealer, what if I bought propane today, what would they charge me? That's the number they tell you. But we just it's hard when you're trying to communicate, if people say this and go, yeah, I don't pay that, and then they discard the whole analysis. I know it's hard, but we just have to be aware that propane number is always significantly inflated from what people actually pay, and it's way different. Fuel oil is a little higher. Usually the EIA number is a little higher, but propane is always way higher.
Floyd? Thanks, Ken.
Yeah, so a couple of questions. And this is good work. Thanks for sharing this. I would like to see a similar sort of analysis for delivered measures. I mean, if we're looking at if we're trying to convey what the consumers might expect with respect to cost savings. I think it would be, this sort of analysis would be more informative if we also show the delivered measures and the cost savings potential going from fossil fuels to renewable liquid and gaseous fuels. So that's one. The second point or question I have is, I would think this sort of analysis would be more informative rather than showing like an overall return on investment or, payback period, all of this stuff, which looks good on paper, but for a consumer who has to front, significant capital costs, it's difficult to wrap your head around, well, I'm going to pay $25,000 here, and in year 15, I finally make it back and I start to, generate real savings or whatever the analysis is. It seems to me it would be more informative to have this sort of analysis done kind of on a year-by-year basis, and also reflecting the expected ramp up of the various sorts of measures. My point being, there are certain measures that'll take more time to deploy, and other measures are immediately available. It would be good to show those relative ramp ups so that we can inform the audience with respect to, these particular measures can get you immediate reductions in terms of savings as well as GHGs. These other measures will get you, substantial reductions, but they're longer term. I would like to see that sort of kind of objective analysis and comparative analysis, just so we're making sure we're not leaving any stones unturned.
Thanks, Floyd. We're not taking public comment at this point. I will at the end of this session, however. Matthew?
Yeah, just got recent context for quotes for 12,000 BTU and 18,000 BTU heat pumps, ductless. I believe the values were 6,500 for the 12K and 7,500 for the 18K. So I know that's not apples to apples, because I believe Ken mentioned we were looking at EVT's value for the 30K or 32. But I think it's worth noting the difference between even the 2023 values that ESCOM reported, or the EVT TRM values that have been used to show estimates here, that things are more expensive than are being shown currently. And some adjustment would be appropriate if we're actually going to try and do an accurate bill savings calculation.
Right, thank you, Matthew. Well, this puts us in an interesting place. The statute asks us to weigh in on this question at some point, but not necessarily, with any deadline. We're obviously not doing the analysis ourselves. We could ask EVT if it's willing to do more analysis and broaden it to all the measures and take into account some of what we're saying. But I don't know that we're there yet, or that EVT would be willing to do that. So where we go next steps is a question for us. And I certainly will take input on that at this point. And if no one
I
has...
actually wonder, Rick, if EVT, Ben, if you'd be willing to share the sheets used to make these calculations, so that the tag could put its own equipment costs and installation costs in, just to make the task a little bit easier, if TAG is going to try and do some sort of adjustment to reflect recent price increases.
Yeah, if we do, yeah, right. Ben, is that possible?
I'll defer to Emily here, being the TAG representative. I sit behind the scenes typically.
Emily?
Yeah, we can send a follow-up email and be prepared to share next steps from Efficiency Vermont's perspective in the next full TAG meeting. Does that work?
Well, right, but and also ask whether you're willing to share the underlying spreadsheets.
Yeah, at this point, I don't have an answer for that, so I'm gonna have to follow up on that as well, Matthew and Rick, but we're happy to support next steps. I'm just not sure exactly what
Yeah,
those next steps
well,
are.
right, and neither am I, and let's hear from you and let's give it a little more thought amongst ourselves. Again, there's not an immediate deadline associated with this task to be either explicit or to be inferred from the statute. So I'll leave it at that for now. And I will take public comment. Those of you, members of the public who have any thoughts on this question, please raise your hand. I see Mr. Atkinson does. Please, welcome.
Hi, in looking at the chart on the economic impacts, I'm quite surprised to see the return on investment being like 16 years or 24 years on weatherization and air sealing. And as an energy auditor and energy coordinator for the town of Plainfield, and it depends on where you're starting from. If you've got the leakiest farmhouse in the state and you go in and do great weatherization and air sealing stuff, then you're going to get a payback return on investment a lot shorter period of time than that. So I think that somehow you just need to quantify that, because it makes it look like, oh, that weatherization, it's not sexy. And oh, by the way, it takes 24 years to pay back. You know, there's something wrong with it. The numbers are skewed there. Maybe in terms of the clean heat standard, that doesn't make sense, but you can't really put a modern piece of equipment, air to air, air to water, whatever contraption you want to put in to a house if you haven't done the basic weatherization and air sealing first. Check.
Thank you. Well, we'll keep that in mind as we decide what our next steps are. Did I mispronounce your last name though? Is it Atchinson?
Yes,
I
that's correct.
apologize.
Thank you.
I apologize. Thank you for your
No
comment.
problem. We know each other from past Rail Council times.
Forgive me for not remembering.
Right.
Okay, any other comments on this point? We'll put our heads together and give some thought to how we want to proceed, certainly with input from Emily and EVT. That's will be very helpful. Thank you.
Can I just have a follow-up on Floyd's question to see if EVT has the data to do a similar analysis of biofuels, or that would have to come from a different source?
Yeah, my immediate answer is we don't have that information. Definitely, if the dollars per gallon were delivered, we could definitely pull in that information with what Opinion Dynamics TRM has outlined, but we don't have that information in-house readily available.
Thanks. Good thought, Catherine. Okay, we'll have to think about that too. Okay. Tristan Brown, we do have a moment here for general public comment. So Tristan, please.
I'll make it real fast just with the comment about fuel prices. There is some excellent data out there. ICF is an organization that's done it for a number of different states and at the US level. That's been submitted with some of my earlier public comments back over the summer. And I know there's some really good data out there, especially from the US Department of Energy on biodiesel and renewable diesel as well. So just want to note, if EVT doesn't have that data, there are some excellent sources available. Thank you.
Thank you. You say you filed it earlier.
I believe this would have been back in August, but I can double check that.
Oh, yeah, great. Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Brown. Okay. Any other comments from TAG members, members of the public? Okay. The last item then is our agenda for 2 weeks from now. Catherine, did you send out a draft one earlier?
I did, which already needs to be updated, given that we have now the early action credit order, which the TAG may want to weigh in on. And Deirdre, I don't know if she's still on. Deirdre also raised a couple of other issues that are open for tag input. I think Emily Levin has also brought this up a couple times, which is the questions of, in addition to savings, and what other kinds of, I'm trying to find out where, need to find, or Deirdre, maybe you can bring it up this. So there's other impacts of measures that I think beyond land use or beyond, I'm trying to remember which category it was in, but there were other measures, other impacts that the tag was invited to weigh in on. You sent this in an email this week.
This may be the two kind of big tasks, like public health, quantifying public health and quantifying fuel price impacts. So those are two things that are listed in statute as being under tag, tag duties. And I think this group has kind of determined that they're not really achievable in the short run, at least by the end of the year type of,
Right.
I was just wondering if the group wants to produce, or Rick wants to produce a statement that says like, this is what you would need to do to actually achieve these two asks of the legislature. And
yeah, thank you, Deirdre. We for those of you other tag members, Deirdre and I had a quick back and forth on these two issues, and I have to go back and take a look at what we said, but we will put them on the agenda with suggestions about how we ought to proceed or communicate with the PUC on them. So yes, thank you very much. Public health impacts is one of them, obviously, and I've spoken to Jared about the work that they're doing. And the other one is, as you say, probably something we're not going to be able to speak to before the end of the year. But that's okay, given everything that's going on. But we'll have them on the agenda with a proposal for how to proceed.
And I would maybe even just listening to how the last agenda item is, next steps for that is maybe even take like a temperature check on all the tasks and be like, okay, if we're not going to be able to produce a list of all the measures that reduce annual, lower annual energy bills, this is what we need to, this is the work that is left to do between now and the potential start date of this program to come up with that list or something, just kind of tying up loose ends on stuff that didn't get to a finished point by the next meeting.
Great idea. And I'll tell you what, Deirdre, I will follow up with you to make sure I've got the list.
Sounds good.
So this is, you're like Joseph, you identify the problem, you're going to help solve it. Thank you. Will you be around early next week?
Yes. Yeah.
Then let's follow up then.
Okay.
Okay.
And I guess the only other point that I wanted to just raise here is that the December 12th meeting may in fact be our last meeting unless the tag decides that it wants to have one more meeting the very next following week. So I just keeping that in mind in terms of exactly how much we need to accomplish in that meeting. Okay.
Good point. Good point. So let's the three of us put our heads together and see what we can do. Yeah, last meeting of the year. Correct. Okay. Any final comments from anybody? Any thoughts? Well, if not, then I want to wish you all a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday. It's my favorite. It's the Harvest Festival. Those holidays that are tied to the seasons and agriculture, I think, are the ones most deeply embedded in us. And so please, all of you, enjoy Thanksgiving. And we'll talk to you thereafter. All the best. Thank you for everything.
Thanks, Rick. Happy Thanksgiving.